Hello, I am 8mm Mauser Man, and if you saw my video from a few weeks ago, you saw that I recently went to a gun show, actually a few different gun shows. Now, before I went to one of those gun shows, it came up in a group setting with non-gun owners and people who had never been to a gun show that I was going to one. And so what I realized was most normal people know almost nothing about what a gun show actually is. And so what I'd like to talk about in this video is some common myths and misconceptions that I've heard about gun shows, and specifically I'm going to put them into 3 different categories. And the first one is simply that people just have no concept of what it is. They think it's like something else that they've heard the word show applied to. So the first myth is that a gun show is like a car show. The second is that a gun show is like an industry trade show, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And then the third is you go to a gun show to shoot guns. I don't think any of these myths come from people being stupid. I think it's just because they're taking what they know and applying it to what they don't know. So if you've been to a car show, you know that what that is you go around, you look at cool, classic, or modern cars, and sometimes you vote about which ones are your favorite. It's really all about looking, not really about touching or purchasing. An industry trade show is all about going to an event and seeing what's new or upcoming on the market, or going to network with different companies or organizations that are in a similar vein. In the gun world, this would be like SHOT Show for us. And also, many people thought that when you go to a gun show, you're going to be shooting guns. Again, I don't think this is necessarily stupid. You know that guns are meant to be shot, so a gun show must be about shooting. Now, let's talk about the truth. Usually when people say gun show, what they mean is a consumer-focused trade show. You go to buy, sell, or trade different firearms, ammo, military surplus items, accessories, and other nonsense. If you've been to a gun show, you know that that other nonsense is quite wide-reaching to all sorts of various things. Usually, businesses or individuals will go to gun shows and rent booths, and their hopes are to sell items to customers. Sometimes attendees like myself will bring guns of their own in order to trade or sell those for something else that they might hope to acquire. Although sometimes people go to gun shows just to look at things, and although there are gun shows like SHOT Show that is an industry trade show designed for showing you new products on the market, that's not generally what people are talking about. And that's just not really the point. There may be some consumer-centered gun shows that do allow you to shoot guns as well, although I've never been to one, and I don't think that's the norm. I haven't really ever even heard of such a thing, although I have been to gun shows that had a small archery range set up for people who were there and wanted to do something other than just buy and sell. So usually with gun shows, people are going to buy, sell, and trade, and it's not necessarily about just looking at what is there. Although those were 3 separate myths, I'm sort of putting them into one category because they all fall under the umbrella of just not knowing what a gun show is. However, the second myth is a direct quote from a friend, so I'm just going to read it for you. So I asked him what he thought a gun show was, and this was his answer. I imagine it's basically a MAGA rally, with a bit of potential domestic terrorism thrown in for good measure. Now, he said this slightly as a joke. He does know what a gun show actually is, but this is something that I feel like some people might actually believe. And it comes from this. This is the truth. Anytime you have a group of people with a common hobby together, especially if that hobby is especially politicized, there will be a trend in the political people that it attracts. I found this even in like Facebook groups that I'm a part of about enjoying a certain show or movie or video game. While certain gun rights groups often do have booths at gun shows, and some vendors will probably be selling conservative-centered political merchandise, it's not a political event. It's not really even about politics much at all. It really is just about buying and selling from people who have a shared interest. But because that shared interest is something that often comes up in the political sphere, it does generally attract more conservative people. This does mean that you might feel a little bit out of place if you are left of the center, but also you won't necessarily be alienated either. While conservative white men are statistically more likely to be gun owners in the United States, gun owners in the US are a pretty diverse group of people in race, sex, orientation, beliefs, class, politics, and a lot more. It's not just one united group of a whole bunch of white guys who get together and talk about guns. It really is a diverse group with many different people from many different backgrounds. And this demographic is represented at gun shows too. When I go to gun shows, I often see people who brought their kids, I see people who seem to be from different religious backgrounds, and I see people who are a different race than I am. And that's part of the fun, is just meeting people who are from different groups. I also see people from a lot of different ages. Like I said, people will bring their children. I also see people who are old enough to be my grandfather and maybe even older. Although this is something about gun shows that is common, that it often attracts people from a specific demographic, I've even felt this way in groups that have nothing to do with politics. I've been in Facebook groups where it's basically just assumed that everyone there is politically left, even if the group has really nothing to do about politics or anything political. And the third myth that you have probably heard before is what's called the gun show loophole. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail than it's often talked about. However, this does come with a quick caveat that I am not a lawyer, so this is my perspective from being somebody who has attended a number of gun shows, sold things at gun shows, bought things at gun shows, traded things at gun shows, and bought things other places as well. So I am pretty well versed on the topic, but also this is not legal advice. So there are two myths here. And the first is the gun show loophole, as it is often called. It's that businesses can ignore the normal laws because nobody needs to run a background check at gun shows. There's something special about that specific place. So anyone can buy a gun from anyone at a gun show without passing a background check. However, the other myth is the exact opposite side. There is a myth that everyone at a gun show needs to pass a background check in order to get a gun. Both of these things are not true. So I'm going to answer this, and I'm going to read an exact quote of what the truth is, and then we're going to break it down point by point. So this is what I have written. Speaking on the federal level, so not including state laws or gun show policies, the exact same laws that apply everywhere else apply at gun shows for businesses and for individuals. The first part. Some state and local gun shows will have different policies than what exists at the federal level. So I live in Nebraska, and I'm not going to show you the other side of this paper because it has my personal information on it. In Nebraska, if you were going to purchase a handgun, you need to have this card. And what it is it basically means that you have passed a background check at a police station. And so you go to the police station, you give them, I think, $5, and then a few days to a few weeks later, they'll get back to you with this piece of paper, and that means you're allowed to buy a handgun. That is not a federal law, that is a state law. In many states, you can buy a firearm from a private individual without passing a background check. That's because that's what the federal law states. However, some states do have stricter requirements for that. So if you live in Colorado, what that means is that if you are going to buy a firearm from a private seller, you are supposed to meet that private seller at a gun store, and the firearm will be transferred through the gun store. They'll usually charge some sort of small fee, like $20. That is not a federal law, that is a state law that only applies in Colorado. I'm going to talk about things from the federal standpoint here. The second part of this is that some gun shows will have separate policies. So we're going to talk more about the details of who you don't need to pass a background check to buy from and who you do need to pass a background check to buy from. However, some gun shows will have a policy that if anybody buys a gun, they will need to fill out the 4473, which is the background check paperwork. I'm not saying that that's actually what happens, just that that's what the gun show policy says is supposed to happen. So in this particular part, I'm going to be speaking on the federal level because that's where I often hear this conversation talked about. However, this may vary in your state. The second part of that statement was the exact same laws that apply everywhere else apply at gun shows. What this means is that nothing magical happens once you walk through the doors of a gun show that makes certain federal laws more or less applicable. So if you go to the gun show and buy a gun from a licensed dealer, that would be the exact same as if you walked into their business and purchased a gun from them. If you purchase a gun from a private seller, that would be the exact same as if you met them at a Casey's gas station, which I have done, and bought a firearm from them. Or if you went to their house, or if outside of the gun show you were looking at what rifle you bought, and he was looking at your rifle too, and you decided to swap rifles. The exact same laws would apply. Okay, now let's talk about the last part of that statement. Businesses and individuals. Businesses that deal in firearms have different rules than individuals do. So let's talk about businesses first. Businesses that deal in firearms must have everyone who buys a firearm from them fill out a background check form, or what is often called the 4473. Usually, what they do after this is they make a phone call to the FBI, give your information and what's going on, and then the FBI says whether or not you are allowed to actually purchase that firearm. Now, in Nebraska, like I said, I have this card, And one of the things that this card says is that I've already passed a background check. So if I'm buying from a licensed seller, I still fill out the form, however they don't make the phone call, because I have the card that says I've passed a background check. For private sellers, it is quite a bit different. An agreement between two private individuals who are selling or trading firearms is called a private sale. And federally, no background check is required in the case of a private sale. An individual can go to a gun show with a table full of guns, and as long as they're not operating a business, they have no need to perform background checks if they are buying and selling to someone. So I have two guns to demonstrate these differences. This is a Mauser 9130. This is a H&R 922 pistol. This one I bought from a private individual at a gun show. This one, at the same gun show, I bought from an actual business. So, because I bought this rifle from a private individual, I did not need to fill out the 4473. I walked in, I bought it, and I left. This one I did need to fill out a background check form, because I bought it from an actual business. So if you buy a gun from a private individual, you do not need to pass a background check. If you buy a gun from a business, you do need to pass a background check. So let's say I'm dating a beautiful girl named Bobaquisha, and Bobaquisha tells me that I need to pick between the guns or her. If I make the wrong decision, what I could do is I could bring all of my guns to a gun show, set them out on the table, pay the fee to have that table, and then sell everything there. And I wouldn't need to have people pass background checks in order to do that. But if my local gun store in town went to that same gun show, they would have to require people to pass background checks. So here's the bottom line on that third myth. Well, some sellers at gun shows may sell firearms without performing a background check. Others are required to by law. These laws are no different than they are anywhere else. So this isn't because it's a loophole, as it's often called in the media or by politicians, but it's simply the law applied consistently no matter where you are. Whether you are at a business, whether you are at a gas station, or whether you are at a gun show. So these are some of the most common myths that I've heard about gun shows. However, I do have some others that I could talk about in a future video. Just, this video is long enough already. If you would like to hear those in another video, leave a comment below, and I can do those. Or also, if you've heard myths about gun shows that you would like to hear me talk about, leave those in a comment down below, and I can include them in a future video. So with that being said, I'm 8mm Mauser Man, and I followed all applicable laws when I bought this Mauser 9130, but I lived on.
Which proves it's hard to get the best of a man named John.